everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are continuing with our spooky Halloween theme and doing a long-awaited video on vampire roleplay. I know that some of you have been waiting for this for literally years, so I hope that you all enjoy this deep dive into what vampire roleplay is, what it is not, why people are into it, and how to try it out for yourself, be that as a scene, as a relationship dynamic, or somewhere in between. So let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, I do need to say that this is not about vampirism or the vampire lifestyle subculture. They are not the same as each other when it comes to BDSM roleplay versus something as a lifestyle. They are separate, and while they do overlap in different degrees, I want to be careful to not completely conflate the two. And of course, if you go on YouTube and you search for vampire lifestyle, vampire roleplay, you will get dozens of videos of varying quality, let's say, attempting to represent what this lifestyle is. Now, because of my own experience with seeing kink or BDSM misrepresented by documentaries, sometimes on the very same channels as the ones on vampirism, I want to make sure that I'm not taking those as gospel or saying that they totally represent what that subculture is about. So this is just going to be for BDSM roleplay, not anything about the vampire lifestyle or real vampires, anything like that. I would love to do an interview talking to people in that subculture directly and kind of comparing notes and seeing if or where there is any overlap, but because I'm not doing that interview right now, I want to make sure we are keeping those things separate. So with that being said, in a BDSM context, what is vampire roleplay? Well, like many of the terms that we talk about, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a form of roleplay where one or more of the people involved take on the role of a vampire. This could be of your own creation. It could be inspired by some great works like Nosferatu or Dracula. It could come from even TV shows like True Blood or The Vampire Diaries if you wanted to. And maybe you just love playing the pen and paper version of Vampire the Masquerade so much you want to take your roleplay off of the gaming table, so to speak. Some people do enjoy this as a basis for a DS or power exchange relationship, whereas other people enjoy it because of the logic or flavor it adds into their scenes. I will say that the latter does seem to be more common, but just because one type or one approach is more common doesn't make the other approaches less valid. Now, there is one giant elephant in the room that I need to address before we get any farther into this topic. And I can hear you all saying, Evie, isn't being a vampire all about blood? Isn't this like blood play on maximum difficulty? Isn't this like some super edgy edge play? And blood being involved is like, yes, well, maybe sometimes, kind of, it depends. It's complicated. It can definitely be about the blood, but it's not always only about the blood. I will now give a giant content warning for the rest of this video because we are going to be talking about blood and playing with blood in every possible configuration you can imagine, and probably a couple you haven't yet. So just really be aware, even if it isn't always about that, it is going to come up a lot in this video. That being said, I think one of the big appeals about vampire roleplay is it allows you a really compelling narrative reason to engage in blood play, especially the consumption of blood, that doesn't skew too uncomfortably close to cannibalism. Also, I think humans have just venerated blood for almost all of human history. It has been seen as a life force, an important component of some types of magic. It can be seen in terms like blood oath or blood pact or blood brother, which serves to underscore the gravity of those terms. And if you have ever felt the rush when someone presses a hand against your neck and you can feel your blood rushing under their fingers, or maybe on the other side, you have experienced the sensation of having somebody's pulse thrum under your fingertips and the rush that can come with that. That is a taste of what it can feel like to engage in this type of role play because of how important blood is to life and to being human. It allows us to experiment with some of humanity's deepest shared anxieties, like the fear of death, but it also allows us to play around with our lust for life. So yes, fear play can be part of this, but it can also be about the deep level of subordination you might feel from knowing that someone has free access to your life essence, to your blood, or the rush of power that comes from knowing that you kind of control this aspect of this person's body. To sort of play at having someone's life literally be in your hands. And of course, when we look at some of the various media representations of vampires, they are often depicted as very powerful, extremely charismatic creatures that humans are easily enthralled by and captivated with, and they are so ancient and knowledgeable and can even maybe control humans with mind techniques or dark arts or magic to do their bidding. And knowing all of that, knowing how they are represented, it shouldn't really be a surprise that vampire in erotica, for example, has sort of become shorthand for creating a dominant, maybe even possessive and jealous lover, and that is why it has been so prevalent in erotica for decades. So I would say that at least an allusion to blood is typically part of the experience, even if not in the play directly, usually as part of the backstory. But if you don't want to mess around with blood directly, you still have a lot of options. So first of all, I am going to be talking about how to develop a vampire-focused dynamic or scenes using non-blood elements as the primary component first. So if you really don't want to hear about blood in detail, this is going to be your section of the video, and we're going to save all of the really kind of gory and bloody parts until a little bit later on. So how can you actually form a power exchange dynamic based on vampire roleplay? Well, first of all, I would always start by looking at your inspiration. What types of vampires are you and your partner drawn to, or what would you want to recreate in your relationship? Are you really into True Blood? Are you really into Dracula? Or maybe something more obscure, like an anime like Awari no Seraph? What are the personalities of these vampires? Are they very distant and aristocratic, and they really just see humans as cattle and literally keep them like livestock with barcodes and, you know, keeping them naked in a barnyard until they are ready to be used? Or can they actually fall in love with humans? Can they even be possessive over them as they might with a favorite family pet? Also worth noting, you could have a vampire in vampire or vampire in werewolf dynamic, especially if you are both switches. that may work out better than vampire and human. So don't worry, you do not have to limit yourself to just human-vampire interactions if you find that boring or overdone or trite for some reason. Once you have identified your inspiration, you can then move on to actually building a dynamic. As always, I do recommend starting one piece at a time, adding in slowly, checking in. That goes for all of my videos, but I think a really good place to start with vampires is with simple titles. Things like Master or My Liege, My Lady, anything that kind of has an aristocratic air to it, I think works really well here. Something else I really like here is eye contact restriction, and this works on multiple levels. So on one, it can be a simple show of respect, that they are simply so much more powerful and so much higher than you that you are not even good enough to look them in the eye. If you are playing with the supernatural element especially, it can also work on the level of, well, vampires are so magical and so charismatic that if you are foolish enough to look them in the eyes, that is all they need to entirely possess you. Also remember that vampires are usually hundreds of years old and typically came from time periods and cultures where house servants were much more commonplace and even expected, which makes service the perfect pairing with vampire roleplay. That could be anything from being a gardener, a housekeeper, a chauffeur, to doing very simple things like making sure there are always fresh flowers in a vase, or that all of the curtains are drawn before they wake up, or that there are simply just clean clothes always ready in the closet. If you really want to know more about Victorian service and really going in that historical direction, there is a housekeeping book that is called Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, and that can be a really good resource, not just for this roleplay, but for really any kind of service. Consider also how vampires are often said to have psychic or telepathic powers. I think this works well in a scene for things like mental bondage, as I have said before, but think also how it might be used in a relationship. I think, for example, this is a great reason to add position training to your repertoire instead of the usual thing of a slave offering positions as part of their service. Maybe it is that the vampire is psychically controlling your body to change to shapes that they find pleasing. And don't underestimate the power of a single confidently spoken word or gesture or even a strong gaze. That can communicate volumes, and at least speaking for myself here, I know that that can just send shivers down a submissive spine in a good way. Maybe this also means that the submissive is always compelled to kneel in the vampire's presence. Or maybe it means they have to ask permission before speaking, as though their lips were magically sealed. You can also do things like maybe you have to recite an incantation in person or over text message every day in the morning or every Friday evening to make sure the spell and the bond between you isn't broken, as a way of actually continuing to engage in that role play on a regular basis. In a more practical relationship building sense, maybe this means you are compelled to always tell the truth to your partner because they can read your mind anyway, right? Now, I would be very cautious with this because unfortunately it can be used by people as a manipulation tactic, but I think in the right hands, this can be a very important part of a dynamic because trust and honesty are cornerstones here, and especially if you have a submissive that is very reluctant to say what they're true feelings are or what their deepest desires are, being compelled to by the role play, having a reason mentally that they can tell themselves they have to say what their true feelings are, can actually be very motivating to be able to let out what those hard things to say actually are. This can also take the form of maybe a diary that the partner has access to, where maybe they are expected to say things like how the last scene went, or how they are doing mentally, or different fantasies they have during the day. And that can all be very important information if you like that kind of power exchange. Again, I do really think you should build up to something like this. Don't have this be the first part of your dynamic, but I think, again, when you have this at the core of a healthy, happy, trusting relationship, it can be a really powerful communication tool that also serves to reinforce the role play. Ritual and ceremony shouldn't be overlooked here either. I don't always get the excuse to cover this in my 101 videos because it can be more obscure, but for a lot of people, the ritual acts of doing certain things on a regular basis can be an important underpinning to their DS dynamics. I have already mentioned one, which would be the ritual of reciting an oath of loyalty and devotion to your partner to not break the spell between the two of you. It could also be something as simple as having to present a certain position whenever you first see each other during the day. It could be kissing their boots in thanks, or it could be a big monthly ceremony replete with candles and wine and incense and maybe even blood. And speaking of that, I think now is the time to move on to the blood part of this video. So if you don't want to hear about the blood, thank you so much for watching. If you do want to hear about the blood, let's keep going. As we have already discussed, blood play is one of the main draws to vampire roleplay for many people. Many people have this vision in their heads of fangs going into their necks and feeling the blood drip down and feeling the cold breath or the non-breath of a vampire against their skin. And let me just shatter that illusion right now, because blood play is dangerous. Drinking blood is dangerous. It should scare you to think about someone either drinking your blood or drawing someone else's blood. And if it's not, you may not have thought about this deeply enough yet. I personally do not recommend engaging in either unless you have had a lot of in-person training on blood play related to specifically what types of blood play you wish to engage in. Now, personally, I have learned in person from doctors and EMTs and nurses, but even with all of that knowledge, including watching people draw and drink blood, I don't feel equipped to teach anyone how to do that over the internet because of just how dangerous it can be. I really think you need to have that in-person instruction, watching someone do it, getting the feedback, really seeing everything up close, learning all of those tiny details, and I simply don't have any good alternatives online that you might use as a resource for learning those best practices, especially considering the fact that in the medical field, things like what is best practice is constantly being redefined and updated. You can get seriously sick from drinking human blood. You can develop conditions like hemochromatosis, which is an overload of iron in the blood, not to mention the risk of spreading blood-borne pathogens like hepatitis B or C or HIV, just to name a few. And even if you are the one whose blood is being drawn, there is still a risk for you, because if you have anything from low or high blood pressure to anemia to maybe different sorts of heart conditions or blood clotting issues, or even just on that day being dehydrated or having low blood sugar, you are putting yourself at a higher risk for adverse side effects. And even if you do get all of the training done and you are both healthy, low-risk individuals, and you go and do something like lick an open wound to drink blood, or you bite down to cause puncture wounds to draw blood, that can still lead to nasty infections, and especially in the latter case, also potentially lead to unsightly scars. And if after I have said all of this, you're still thinking, okay, but I need to drink human blood in order to do vampire roleplay, in order for this to be worth it to me, I would still wait until you get to have that in-person instruction. Really make sure you understand all of the pros and cons of various techniques, and also please really think of the repercussions. But if you went, maybe I don't want blood that much, don't worry, I have tons of alternatives that really work almost as well as human blood for this roleplay. I would think, first of all, if you want to recreate the experience of drawing blood, you can use a little bit of creativity, maybe some mental redirection, and definitely a blindfold to very closely make that feel like it happens. We actually see this a lot with knife play, for example, using just a simple butter knife and a credit card, soaking them in ice water before the scene, maybe leaving it under a bed, somewhere out of sight, and then when the blindfold is on and the moment is right and you are getting to that crescendo of the scene, you slash it against their throat or their arm or wherever else, and the adrenaline, the anticipation, the blindfold, everything all works together to really make it feel like that ice cold water is more like blood, and that the credit card or the butter knife feels much sharper than it actually is. If you want to really get to that sensation of like the fang piercing, instead of a credit card, I would maybe look at like a fork or one of those 2-prong forks, you know, for like kebabs or for roasting something over a fire, or even one of those wooden hair sticks that has like 2 prongs on it. I think all of those could work for more of a fang sensation, and that I think is going to be your best option if you want to have that experience without actually puncturing someone's neck. And by the way, for the record, I don't know any fangsmith that recommends using their fangs as a way to either bite someone or to draw blood, so don't do that, please. At best, you are just going to damage your own fangs, or you could maybe go into the skin too deeply and leave too deep of a bite or too large of a bite on someone's neck, and that can be really, really fucking dangerous. So don't have to do that. Really would encourage you not to if the visuals of blood are what is important to you. There are so many options. That could be anything from really cheap Halloween store dyed red corn syrup blood to fake blood packs that you can fill with red drinks, to the blood capsules that get used on stage or in movies to create that like blood coming out of the mouth effect. And I have also even seen recipes online for drinkable fake blood that you can serve at your next Halloween party or maybe your next vampire high protocol dinner. Now be careful, because almost all types of pre-prepared fake blood stain really badly. So if you have a favorite fancy shirt or tablecloth or carpet that you don't want to have to replace, please be really careful where you spray this fake blood around. Now, one, I think, very obvious alternative to human blood would be animal blood. Not raw animal blood, mind you, but like animal blood, food products. So that could be things like blood pudding or blood sausage. These can be harder to find, especially if you are in North America, but if you have a higher end or European butcher shop near you, they may stock something like this. You can add the blood sausage and the blood pudding with the recipe for the drinkable blood, maybe with some other blood foods or maybe some dark red foods to make a whole high protocol dinner suitable for vampires like I talked about before. And I know that some of you are going to ask me about this, so I am just going to proactively give you the answer. No, I don't know of any lube that looks like human blood. My only advice that I can give you is around that time of the month, use a Diva cup and have your fun then. But I don't know of any lube that has a body safe red dye, that doesn't stain, that isn't full of sugar, that would be safe for most types of sex. I just don't know of any. If you are shopping on Amazon, on Etsy, on somewhere like that, and you find a blood lube, please be really careful with the ingredients. You do not want to get a yeast infection over stuff like this, and please just be careful. So on a final note, I do want to talk about some non-blood drinking related scene ideas. I think one of the other popular tropes in the genre is CNC, or consensual non-consent, and the idea of being ravished by this powerful, overwhelming, beast-like non-human creature, or this mystical ancient force, for example. Or what about some takedown and capture play and being dragged to the vampire's castle to await your punishment? Maybe when you are there, you are chained up and locked into a St. Andrew's cross and whipped for their pleasure, because remember, vampires don't have to just be about blood. They can also be what is called a psychic vampire and feed off of the energy, feed off of people, of living creatures. Or what about being buried alive in a coffin and then later awoken as a baby vampire yourself? The options are, as always, pretty much limitless and only really limited by your imagination and your limits. With all that being said though, I think that is everything that I have time for today. I hope that you all enjoyed this deep dive into vampire roleplay. If you have any comments, questions, anything else you would like me to know, you can leave that down in a comment in the comment section below, especially if you are someone that does vampire roleplay, maybe if you overlap with the BDSM and the vampire subculture. I would love to know more about what that is like, so please, again, leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this, if you have not already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you really enjoyed this, if you want to support what I do, the best way that you can do that is through Patreon. A link to that will be down below. And if you already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a very happy Halloween. Bye-bye.